do you see a lot of fusion restaurants or ramens when you go out that are not maybe like off the wall, like the chocolate ramen or anything you've had, but maybe you've seen like a German inspired, Mexican inspired, anything like that? Do you see those often at all in Tokyo?
Okay, so shifting the conversation just a little bit, making ramen at home is like a dangerous proposition for some people that because it's so, all those elements we were talking about, the broth, the tare, the noodles, it just seems like overwhelming and stuff. So I guess question for Frank, you've talked about making a lot of instant ramen. Have you ever tried to make a bowl of ramen at home, like
That's I
a
didn't even
real
think about
thing?
that question because you do give ramen tours,
Yeah.
right? And you eat a lot of ramen. This is a good one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've certainly made it at home. I would say that I'm not. I think at I wouldn't have a successful ramen shop for the ramen that I made,
Okay, that's
but
fair.
yeah, well, successful asterisk mark. I mean, no, I've to better understand. Like, I think of course, like just not having me only talk about how it's prepared. Of course, diving straight in and understanding myself, like how it's prepared. No, I've done broth, noodles, and toppings. Of course before, but it's a lot of work. Those three
Mm,
things, even if you're outsourcing one of them. When I say outsourcing, right, like not making your own noodles, the noodles themselves are just such a big,
they're
a
hard.
bit, yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard. So, both of you, I know you've made ramen at home. Like, hats off. It's not easy, as you know. Like putting all of it together, harmony is included in that conversation.
Yes.
So yes,
Yes.
I've made it, and I think right now I'm quite busy, but I kind of want to dive back into it and just set aside some time where it's like, no, I'm going to get back to trying to make a beautiful soup. Maybe just doing the soup, for a certain period of time,
Oh
right? And
yeah,
then doing, okay, we'll
yeah.
get back to noodles later, just because, yeah,
I love that philosophy.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
It's almost like meal prepping because a lot of people, I think we take advantage of the fact that like you guys are out in Tokyo, right? For me to go get a bowl of ramen, I probably have to travel 35 to 40 minutes minimum, right? And like I will do that because even if I spend 40 minutes driving, go order my food and eat my food and then come home, it's like a 2.5 hour deal. But for me to make that would take two or 3 days, right?
Mm,
So maybe if you're making it at home, like you said, focus on like one day you're just gonna make the broth,
mm-hmm.
right? And then you make enough broth to also like freeze it. So you can
Mm,
freeze, I don't know, 6 or 7 different portions of it, and then you have it in the freezer. And then make your
mm-hmm.
noodles, and noodles freeze really well. That's a good take. I like that a lot.
Yeah, practicing and perfecting a skill. If you want to get good at something, you got to do it a couple times to like figure out what's going on. I think the first time I ever, okay, so coincidentally, the first time I ever made ramen at home, I was recording this video for Crunchyroll and we posted it online and it like got 14 million views or something like that. And I felt like a real sham because that was the first time I'd ever made ramen before ever. And all these people were watching this video and looking back on it, I was like, oh, this is not good. Like this is really bad. I feel like I misinformed some people about what goes into a good, ramen soup. But I don't know. I feel like I was curious, Paul, like what you talked about a ramen that you made at home that sounded really good based on the Demon Slayer character. What's your favorite? Have you made any other ramens? Like, what's your favorite one or most interesting ramen that you've
Mm,
ever made?
I would say my favorite because of it's so easy to make is just like a miso ramen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
you're letting the miso flavor the soup versus having to wait for bones to boil. And it's like,
Mm.
when you emulsify pork bones, it takes 12 hours. Like you can't rush it. I mean, maybe with like what is it, the Instapots, that
Yeah,
like
yeah,
pressure
yeah.
cooker, but I still feel like that's not the same as just
Mm.
cooking it for a long period of time. I love pork miso ramen because again,
Mm.
it's so easy. You can do it in like 30 minutes, grab
Mm.
some dried noodles. I think my favorite bowl that I have made is just a straight up spicy tonkatsu. Like
Mm.
just a good old spicy tonkatsu. But like I like adding spice of from like a few different chilies. So I'll use like the Chinese red pepper flakes. I'll also use Szechuan peppercorn in there,
Mm.
which is like the ma and la flavors, which is not very traditional in ramen. But
Yeah.
then I'll throw like charred jalapenos with corn on top of it because like I
Oh.
like Mexican influences, right? Like
Oh.
I like throwing that stuff on top of it. I like my little pat of butter on
Mm.
top, for like
Yeah.
that extra richness. And so when I make ramen, I think of it as like all of my favorite little things and how I can bring it into one bowl,
Mm.
right? So I would love to do like a Mexican inspired ramen, maybe like we were talking about earlier, where it's like
That
you're
sounds so
using like a
good.
mole base,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
With like charred chilies and all this other stuff, and it's just something you've never had before. And that's, I don't know, for me it's got to be tonkatsu has been my favorite to make, but I won't go through the effort of making it very
Yeah.
often because I know
Yeah.
how much work it is.
Those kind of fusion ramens are really excite me, and like a Mexican fusion ramen kind of, oh, that sounds so much fun. I've made one ramen at home also from the anime Miss Koizumi Loves Ramen Noodles. That's a German inspired ramen.
Mm,
And so the broth is like a nice creamy tonkatsu, but then the toppings are like basically bacon, speck, there was like
it's like super
A
rich.
Bavarian seasoning that I sprinkled on top, as well as some sauerkraut. And this bowl of ramen was like surprisingly so good because all the flavors were so in balance with the little bit of the sauerkraut there, and then you had the nice kind of like porky bacon element to it, and that was really really fun. And I like that idea of like fusing those sort of flavors together.
And so Frank, on to kind of piggyback off that topic, do you see a lot of fusion restaurants or ramens when you go out that are not maybe like off the wall like the chocolate ramen or anything you've had, but maybe you've seen like a German inspired, Mexican inspired, anything like that? Do you see those often at all in Tokyo or during your ramen tours?
Sometimes, yes, but maybe not as often as we'd like to see. I think sometimes they'll
Mm.
do like I feel like a lot of ramen restaurants in Tokyo, they might do like a gente, which is basically a limited time bowl. And that's a
Right.
fun
Yeah.
sort of space for them to experiment. Maybe this is only available in the summer, right? They'll switch it up
Mm.
for the spring, fall, winter, like a different sort of bowl. But not as much like, yeah, let's say a Mexican cuisine inspired ramen or something like that. But and this is not to say that there isn't, of course, right? The fun thing about ramen again is like still experimenting, right? That's how ramen was created in the beginning, right? By experimenting, taking these
Mm.
Chinese dishes and tweaking them. But with some places, and depending on where you are in Tokyo, even in the country, maybe that experimentation will stop at certain points, right? But outside of Japan, like maybe this is where the best ramen is gonna be when, yeah, you don't have the same ingredients that you do in Japan, right? So if you're trying to do
Right.
exactly what they're doing in Japan, it might not be the same. And as long as you're, a Mexican cuisine inspired ramen, like what you described, like it would be delicious, like as long as like harmony is there, right? If there's that harmony overall, why
Yeah.
not? Ramen can take different forms, I think, outside of Japan. And yeah, of course, people are going to have differing opinions as to whether, like, okay, that's not ramen or it still is ramen. But that's what makes ramen and cuisine in general fun. And I sometimes wish,
Mm.
yeah, maybe a few other places would try to change things up a bit more.